let's just dive right in, because today we're taking an ancient text and putting it under a completely modern microscope. We are talking about King Solomon. But look, before we get started, I want you to completely put aside any preconceived notions of him as just a religious figure. For our purposes today, we're looking at him as a master architect. This is a guy who left behind a highly structural, deeply psychological blueprint for generating and, more importantly, sustaining true wealth. The insights we're extracting from his writings in Proverbs, well, they're really less about morality and much more about the absolute mechanics of how wealth is built and kept.
It's a phenomenon we've all seen in the headlines, right? Someone hits the jackpot, wins absolute millions, and then what? A few years later, they have absolutely nothing. Why does that happen? Well, because as Solomon figured out millennia ago, poverty doesn't actually live in your wallet. It lives in your head. It's totally rooted in our subconscious. If your mind isn't prepared for wealth, you will subconsciously destroy whatever gold you touch. So this explainer is going to show you exactly how to build that mental readiness.
So here is our roadmap for today. 1. Wealth begins in the mind. 2. Patience and inner programming. 3. Execution over empty words. 4. Debt, generosity, and counsel. And finally, 5. The ultimate hidden rule.
Section 1. Wealth begins in the mind. Rule 1. Wisdom above all.
The foundation of true wealth isn't actually some slick financial tactic. It's an uncomfortable psychological truth. Notice what this proverb deliberately leaves out. It doesn't say hustle 24/7. It doesn't say save your pennies or diversify your portfolio. It says, first and foremost, get wisdom. And the reason this is so uncomfortable is that wisdom cannot be bought in some 3-hour online course, Wisdom is cultivated through quiet self-reflection, observation, and humility. And let's be honest, those are things our modern hyper-distracted world actively encourages us to avoid.
And this brilliantly illustrates the difference between two things we constantly confuse. We are entirely obsessed with consuming information, but information is just knowing you need to save money. Wisdom is entirely different. Wisdom is understanding the deep-seated internal fear or the psychological barrier that completely stops you from actually doing it. Information is knowing the strategy, but wisdom is knowing yourself well enough to catch yourself when you're self-sabotaging.
All right, moving on to Section 2, Patience and Inner Programming, covering Rules 2 and 3, Time and Mindset.
Here, we're really addressing the modern war on patience and those invisible scripts just constantly running our financial lives in the background. The absolutely crucial phrase to focus on here is little by little. I mean, we live in an instant gratification culture, right? We literally want our food, our entertainment, and our wealth delivered in under 30 minutes. But that instant access has completely rewired our brains, making us incredibly intolerant of the slow, grinding process required to build real value. Solomon is warning us here that wealth gained hastily dwindles, because the person holding it hasn't actually developed the capacity to manage it.
Think of it like this. Building real wealth is exactly like growing a massive oak tree. In year 1, it looks like absolutely nothing is happening, right? But invisible roots are forming deep below the ground. By year 5, you finally have a stable trunk growing against the wind. And by year 10, you've got these deep, unshakable roots capable of surviving massive economic storms. Fast, unearned success is basically just a tree planted in shallow dirt. The second a real storm hits, no question, it immediately topples over. Which brings us to Rule 3. For as he thinks in his heart, so is he. Now listen, this is not about superficial, stare-in-the-mirror positive thinking. It is way deeper than that. Solomon is talking about the subconscious programming installed in us by our families, our culture, our early life experiences. If you secretly harbor this belief that money is evil, or I just don't deserve success because of some invisible script running in your head, you will absolutely always find a way to blow up your financial growth. It literally doesn't matter how bulletproof your strategy is.
Section 3, Execution over Empty Words. Rules 4 and 7, The Power of Action.
This is where we bridge the gap between internal planning and actual real-world execution. Solomon famously points to the ant to explain Rule 4. The ant acts in the present moment. It prepares for winter during the summer, but the absolute most important part, it needs no captain or supervisor. So the takeaway here is that true wealth builders develop a relentless inner compass. They aren't waiting around for a boss's validation, they aren't waiting for the economy to be absolutely perfect, and they sure aren't waiting for a round of applause. They know the summer of opportunity doesn't last forever, so they execute now.
And that leads directly into Rule 7. Mere talk tends only to poverty. When Solomon talks about poverty here, he's talking about a state of being. He means the massive gaping canyon between what you say you're going to do and what you actually do. Let's be real, we all know someone with a grand master plan they've been talking about for 5 years, right? But a 5-year startup plan that just sits closed in a notebook isn't a business plan. Actually, scratch that. It's just a personal diary with aspirations. Incomplete movement will always beat perfect immobility.
Section 4. Debt, Generosity, and Counsel. Tackling Rules 5, 6, and 8 here. This is the defensive pillar of our architecture. We're looking at how money flows, the absolute trap of borrowing, and why you desperately need external wisdom. Let's define Rule 5 with this concept of the generosity mindset. Solomon noticed something fascinating. People who compulsively hoard their wealth out of sheer fear actually end up impoverished. Why? Because wealth is actually a lot like water. It has to circulate to maintain its value and utility. If it sits, it stagnates. Strategic generosity is the ultimate anti-scarcity mentality. When you give, you cultivate this internal state of abundance, and that creates the exact mental soil you need to recognize new opportunities.
Now for Rule 6, and this is a stark warning found in Proverbs 22:7. The borrower is servant to the lender. We really need to distinguish between good debt and bad debt here. Good debt is leverage. It's a tool that generates more value than the interest is costing you. But bad debt? Man, bad debt is basically a modern form of slavery. It's a trap for immediate consumption that totally dictates your life choices. It dictates whether you can take a risk, whether you can quit a toxic job, and exactly how many hours of your life belong to a bank instead of to you. You have to guard your financial freedom fiercely.
Rule 8 is all about who you listen to, and today we have access to way more opinions than ever before. But remember, opinion is not counsel. First step, ignore that well-meaning relative whose advice is based purely on their own anxieties. You need to find someone who has actually navigated your specific path. Look for people with real scars, not just clean textbook theories. A true advisor is not there to coddle you or make you feel warm and fuzzy. They are there to point out the uncomfortable truths you literally cannot see yourself.
Section 5. The ultimate hidden rule. Rule 9, the core of everything.
This is the core of the whole shebang. It completely dictates the success or failure of every single rule we've discussed so far. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life. Solomon was being surgical here. When he says heart, he isn't talking about romance. He's talking about your core, your internal energy, your relationships, your deeply held beliefs, your emotional state. These things are your truest capital. Everything you ever build externally has to be constructed internally first. Because here's the harsh reality. What is not guarded inside is absolutely going to leak outside. If you fail to protect your inner circle, if you're constantly allowing toxic conversations, draining relationships, and just relentlessly negative media into your mind, it will manifest externally, period. It'll show up as highly impulsive decisions, self-sabotaging right before a massive win, and the rapid, painful loss of whatever wealth you've managed to scrape together. Dust can become gold, for sure, but only if the mind is fiercely protected. So, I want to leave you with this final, incredibly provocative question to chew on. What are you actually allowing into your heart? Take a really hard, honest look at the habits, the everyday conversations, the media, and the core beliefs you're currently harboring. Are they building your foundation, or are they just setting you up for a massive collapse? Real change starts the exact moment you answer that question with brutal honesty. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I highly encourage you to keep questioning, keep structuring your mind, and keep building those deep roots. Catch you next time.